Imagine you're 19 years old with your whole life in front of you. Then suddenly you're rushed to the hospital in a state of septic shock. In the ambulance, you experience respiratory and multiple organ failure, which causes you to lose circulation to your extremities. After several blood transfusions and the removal of your ruptured spleen, you're diagnosed with bacterial meningitis and given less than a 2% chance of survival. Amy Purdy doesn't have to imagine that. It all happened to her. She recovered but lost both of her legs below the knee due to the lack of circulation she suffered. Her kidney failure meant that she would need a transplant, a gift she received from her father a week before her 21st birthday. Just 3 months after that kidney transplant, Amy entered the USASA National Snowboarding Championship, where she won 3 medals in the events. Today, she is one of the top-ranked adaptive snowboarders in the world and was the 2014 Paralympic bronze medalist. She is the only double-leg amputee competing at the world-class level. She's also the proud co-founder of Adaptive Action Sports, a nonprofit organization that empowers people living with permanent disabilities to get involved in action sports. Amy Purdy joins us now to talk about what it means to live beyond limits and why she's determined to prove that our destinies are not determined by the events of our lives. Amy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was about 7 minutes of your life right there. I told everything there.
I don't even need to talk.
Yeah, we're done, right? No, but we're not done, because what I find really interesting about your story is a year before this happened to you, your mom's telling you the story about a neighbor and a son who is 19 years old and how this happened to him. And you've spoken about this, how you reacted to that. Tell us what your thoughts were as you were hearing that story.
My mom, she had told my sister and I about her friend. Actually, it was a friend's neighbor's son, but this kid was the same age that I was, 19. He contracted some kind of crazy disease. We thought it was a flesh-eating disease. He lost both of his legs below the knees. He had a kidney transplant. And when my mom was telling me this story, here I was 19. I was a massage therapist at the time, really active and healthy. And I remember actually sitting in the bathtub that night looking at my legs and thinking, what would I do without my legs? How would I handle losing my legs? And I thought I would wheel myself to the edge of a cliff and just throw myself off. I mean, that sounds really harsh, but when you're 19, you can't even imagine what your life would be like if something that tragic would happen. And then here, a year later, the exact same thing happened to me. You know, and I think I was just thinking in a way that any kind of teenager would think, like, oh, I'd never be able to handle that. That's really where my train of thought was. But it's amazing the strength that you find in yourself when you have to use it.
And one of the things I love about what you say when you give speeches is, I'm not my legs. But you don't start out thinking that. When something like this happens to you, you're 19 years old, I mean, it must have been crushing. Talk to us about that transformation, because I think it's a great lesson for all of us, because all of us face adversity in our life or loss. And getting from this point to that point is a difficult transition, and I can't imagine what it was like for you, but it must have been very difficult.
Yeah, it was incredibly difficult. I mean, for one, so I was in a coma for a couple weeks, and when I woke up, I was aware that I was going to lose my legs. They were in a really bad condition, and so I had a little bit of time to wrap my head around it, but not much. I mean, I had maybe a week and a half of, okay, I'm probably going to lose my legs here. And it was hard to wrap my head around. It was hard to believe that this was going to be my life. What was my life going to be like without my legs? But I do have to say that what got me through was gratitude. Just being grateful for what I did have. Grateful that I was alive, because I nearly died multiple times from organ failure and my spleen rupturing, and I was in emergency surgery and flatlined multiple times. So I remember thinking, just losing my legs isn't as bad as it could have been. And I still kind of carry that through my life. Anytime something tragic or traumatic happens, I'm always trying to focus on, well, what do I have, and what do I have to look at that I'm grateful for, versus what's affected me at that moment.
You're 19, you're all about sports and competing. and then all of a sudden it looks like the door's shut, and yet it's not. And I mean, it opened it up a whole new world for you from a competitive standpoint. One of the other things that you said that I think is fantastic, you know, it's not about disabilities, we've got super abilities, which is really true. I mean, when you look at some of the stuff that's being done, it's amazing. So talk to me about the transition. Okay, you're laying there, you're like, oh my God, I lost my legs, but you still found a way to go out and compete.
Yeah, well, for one, the passion to just figure it out. I realized that my, I guess, intention through everything I've done is to find a way. And so I wanted to figure out a way to snowboard again, and that kind of fired me up. That got me really excited to do it. And I had to figure out how to make the legs to do it because there weren't legs that were already on the market. And so there's something about the creative process of figuring it out that I thrived on. And that led to me being able to snowboard again and winning those medals and realizing, okay, I think I can do this. And then just getting creative and seeing where it took me.
And the legs, I think that's another really interesting point. I think it's Mike Schultz, you said, made his legs in the garage. I think it's so interesting. We've got young people with so much drive and ambition, yourself among them. It's changing how these are constructed in a sense, isn't it? I mean, prosthetics have changed so much. You've got a lot of young people coming back from wars. It's kind of driving it in a way, isn't it?
It is. It's really cool. It's a really cool kind of community to be a part of because there are the mainstream companies that are producing kind of legs for the masses, walking legs, running legs. But then there's those of us like Mike Schultz and myself who do these different sports, and there's not legs out there that you can just pull off the shelf for snowboarding or wakeboarding or motocross. And so people go to their garage and build the legs themselves. And yeah, it's really cool. If it's not there, then build it and see what happens.
How about you? You've kind of taken it beyond just I'm going to go out and compete. Now you're kind of in this field and saying, okay, let's push this forward. So talk to me about that. And I know your boyfriend and you started this company. How did that evolve? How did that happen?
Right. So my boyfriend Daniel and I, we started a nonprofit organization in 2005 called Adaptive Action Sports. And the reason we started the organization was because at the time that I lost my legs, there were zero resources for somebody like me who had a disability, who wanted to snowboard or skateboard or do motocross. But there was a lot of support for somebody with a disability who skied or wanted to run, who wanted to do the classic kind of sports. So we started this organization just to kind of pull the community together, see who is out there, and to learn from each other, and ended up kind of helping to create a movement, opening all these other doors for people who have disabilities who relate to those types of sports versus the typical sports or the classic sports that are out there. And one of our big goals from the very beginning was to try to get snowboarding into the 2014 Paralympic Games. And so we ended up going on this kind of 5-year mission. We teach snowboard lessons to people who have never snowboarded before, whether it's a kid or it's a wounded vet, all with disabilities. Or we also teach athletes who've snowboarded how to compete at an elite level. And then we also put on competitions so that those athletes have a place to compete at. So we kind of created this pipeline to the Paralympics, and we helped to get it into the 2014 Paralympic Games.
So you're pretty effective at going out and making your pitch, undoubtedly. I guess there's always a stigma when you have a disability, or there's always the way people look at things. I mean, what would you want society, how would you like society to evolve and view disabilities?
I mean, it's interesting because I don't consider myself having a disability. Like, I don't necessarily consider myself a part of a community that other people aren't a part of. We all have things we have to adapt to. We all have obstacles, and I think it becomes a disability when we don't overcome our obstacles. So and we all, in a way, have a disability. And I think that's just, I think if anything that I've done has had an impact, or I've wanted it to have an impact, I would say just that we're all the same. We're all the same. We all have our challenges. We all have our obstacles. We all have our disabilities, and they don't need to be disabilities. If we're moving forward and we're following our passions and we're working hard and then anything's possible.
Well, I guess it gets back to that old phrase, one door shuts, another one opens. It may even be a bigger door. And you have to have that kind of attitude, I guess, too, right?
Yeah, I mean, my legs haven't disabled me at all.
Okay.
Here people may look at my legs and say, oh, she has a disability. Maybe by textbook I have a disability, but my legs have never disabled me. If anything, they've enabled me. I've gone so much further having prosthetic legs than I ever would have gone before. And I've traveled the world on these legs. I've snowboarded and won medals on these legs. I've danced on these legs. I've used this so-called disability, to enable me to get to where I'm at today. So,
well, let's talk about where you're at today, because I mean, let's just go back to the Sochi Games. I mean, that's enough. I mean, that's enough to have on your plate. But then you also have like Hollywood saying, "Hey, we want you dancing with us." You've got to juggle both of these. How did you do that?
Yeah, it was a challenge. It was a challenge, and I was really worried. I was really concerned that I wouldn't be able to do both of them at the exact same time. But about 2 weeks before going to Sochi, which here I had been training for probably a solid 2 years, working my way up just to Sochi. 2 weeks before, I got the invite to be on Dancing with the Stars, and the catch was that my first Dancing with the Stars competition was just 3 days after my Sochi race in Russia.
Oh,
and so at first I thought there's no way this is possible, but then I actually got kind of fired up about it. I thought this is a great way to follow up Sochi as far as I'm still going to be in the competitive mode, and physically I'm going to be at my peak, and I decided to make it work. So when I was in Russia, I would snowboard for 4 hours in the morning and dance with my partner Derek for 4 hours each night.
Jeez.
And we only had about 4 days to prepare for our first dance, which the other dancers had about 2.5 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
So I was just flying by the seat of my pants the whole time.
Any final thoughts, if there is a young kid watching today who's struggling, and as I said, you are this shining beacon. Any kind of thoughts you want to give them? Because I know, getting from where you were in that hospital bed to sitting here today, you make it look effortless and graceful and easy, but there were some tough, dark times along the way, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely there were. I mean, and there still are. Every day I wake up and I put my legs on. I'm reminded every day. And I mean, it has been challenging, but I continue to just go back to, I spoke to a child yesterday who just lost his leg, and I just told him, follow your dreams. It's not about your circumstances. We all have challenging circumstances. So you have to work a little bit harder. You have to adapt a little bit more. You have to get used to maybe other people not always believing in you. But absolutely follow your dreams. And if you are passionate and you work hard enough, for me, I've learned that anything's possible.
No, it certainly has been the case with you. Thank you so much for coming in.